Okay, so this is part 2 of our username and password application that we are trying to build. So we've just created our variables that we're storing our components or elements or view elements into. So what we're going to do now is that when a user clicks on a button, we want to get the username that's currently in there, the password that they've entered, and we want to check to make sure that that username and password matches a username and password that we have already stored. So the first thing we're going to do now is we are going to button login dot, we're going to set an on-click listener, which means that it listens for when the button is clicked, it listens for an action or a listener, and then we'll do something. So set on-click listener is what we need to use, and then new view dot on-click listener. So when this button is clicked, we're expecting something to happen. So what we're going to do here is when this button login is clicked, we want to get the username and the password. So in this case, what we have here is string. We're going to create a string variable. So let's say string. I'm going to call this get username, so that there's no confusion in case, because we have an edt username. Or what we can do is just do str username so that you know that it's a string username, but I'm going to use get username. It's up to you, whatever name you want to give it. And then I'm going to refer to this edte username dot. When you hit the dot, it gives you several methods that you can choose from. Remember, it's a class, it's an object. So there's methods in there which you can get access to. So I want to get the text of that's inside that edit box, that box that I showed you earlier in the design where we have an edit username and edit password. So I want to get whatever text the user has entered. And then I want to convert whatever text the user has entered into a string. So I'm going to choose toString method converts whatever's in there into a string. And then that is it. So now when a button is clicked, I'm getting whatever text is inside that edte username. I'm going to repeat the same step for the password as well. So string get password equals edte password dot get text dot to string. So when my button is clicked, it will get the username and password. The reason why we are not putting these two variables up here is because, remember, every time the button clicks, we want something to happen. If we put this string username, get username, edit text there, when a button is clicked, it won't do anything. It will just remain fixed. And it will only happen once it was first created. Because remember, we are using our application, so we're using it over and over and over again. So now when our button is clicked, we want to now first, you want to check, think about it. You have to think about this, because first, we want to check if it's empty first, because we want to be able to know that, oh, it's not empty before we validate anything else. Because remember, space is also a character sometimes. So if you're not careful, someone might put space and just submit anything into your database if you're using databases, etc. So we want to check that it's not empty. So we're going to use if and else statements. Okay, these are conditional if and else statements. So what we're going to do is if get username dot is empty. These are methods that already comes along with strings. The string object variable is empty. We want to say something. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to check both the username and the password together. We can do them separately, but I want to do them together. So to do that, all I have to do is put an and. Now this ampersand here in Java means and. You're comparing two things, conditional, if and. So we're going to do get password dot is empty. So what we're doing here is I am checking to see if the username and the password are both empty. I want to send a message to the user. I want to say, listen, mate, you cannot go on. So what I'll do is, this is where our txt display now comes in. So we'll do txt display dot. Again, remember, we have something called set text. We have something called get text. But because we're using a text view, you can't enter anything inside of it. So I want to use a set text because I'm going to be setting that text to it. So I'm going to set the text to, I'm going to put in some quotation marks in there. I'm going to say all fields required. So it means that it forces the user to enter something inside. Else, I want to be able, we can say welcome. But remember, this application is not just, the person just entering their username and password. We actually want to check with a fixed username and a password. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a fixed username and a fixed password and then check to make sure that that is what is happening. So in my case, I'm going to create a string because I want to store a string username and password. And I'm going to do fixed username equals, and then I am going to add to, let's say I want to make the username Kofi, or let's make it Crazy, which is a name for people born on Sundays in Ghana. And then password string fixed password equals, let's say my password is going to be Crazy123. So I've created a fixed username and I've also created a fixed password. And then what I'm going to do is, if the user if the get username and password is not empty, so that's what this else statement is there for. I'm going to write another if statement. I'm doing it this way. I'm doing everything in step by step so that you also understand it, so that later on when you understand, you'll be able to cut, because we can cut this code shorter. But I'm doing it this way so that you'll be able to understand the steps that it takes before I introduce shorter ways of doing things. So this is a step-by-step tutorial that we're going through. So if the get username is not empty and the get password is not empty, else what we want to do, we now want to check to make sure that the username and password that the user have entered is equals to our username and password. So we'll do if get username dot equals. Remember, we're dealing with strings, we're not dealing with integers, so you can't just use equals, which you usually use for variables, because remember, we're dealing with strings, and string is like an object. So string refers to, like, if you use equals, you only have a reference to where it's stored. You won't have the content itself. But we're trying to compare what's inside. So we're using the dot equals. So dot equals fixed username. And again, I'm going to do that and the password together. You can do it separately. You can have another if statement after that you've done the get username, but I'm doing them together. And get password dot equals fixed password. And then we're going to do our else statement. So what we're saying here is, if the get username dot equals the fixed username, so we're comparing whatever the user has entered is equals to whatever fixed username we had and whatever fixed password we have, we want to, let's say in our txt display, we want to say welcome, and then I'm going to concatenate it by adding the fixed username, so that when a person logs in, we'll just tell them welcome, the name that the person has entered correctly. This plus here is concatenate. We're adding a variable and a string together. It's stored differently, so we have to concatenate it together. So that's called concatenation. I'm going to add a space here so that it's not together. I can even add the password as well to show the password, but for this purpose, I'm just going to show the username because I don't think when you log in, the first thing you see is your password on any application. So what we have, I'm going to do text display dot set text. If the username and password the person has entered does not match our fixed username and our fixed password. So set the text to get out of here, man. And then at this stage, you've created an activity main layout. You've added two edit texts. You had a button and a text view. So you've dealt with text, edit text. You've dealt with a text view and a button. So now you ask yourself, so now how do I run my application now? How am I going to run this application? I'm confused. How do I run this application? So what we're going to do is, now that we've finished writing our code, what I'm going to do is, this is how our code should be. We haven't tested it yet, but I'm hoping that everything will work well. But in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can actually test this application in your phone. You don't need to plug in your Android phone. You can, if you want to, you can display on your Android phone and test it out. Or Android Studio comes in with a built-in emulator, which mimics exactly how a phone would, the operations and functionality of a phone. I will show you how to create that. So see you in the next video.